It began on a quiet Sunday morning, the kind that feels harmless, routine, almost sacred. Birds sang outside. The sun painted the street gold. Nothing about that day warned what waited behind one front door. When police arrived, they were met with stillness, not the kind that comforts, but the kind that chills. No sound of life. No television. No crying. No laughter. Only silence, heavy, wrong, and endless. They entered cautiously, their footsteps echoing through the hall. A pot of coffee sat cooling on the counter. A family photo hung crooked on the wall, smiling faces staring into nothing. And then, the horror revealed itself. A mother. A father. A daughter. 2 infant twins. All gone. No signs of struggle. No forced entry. Just a single folded note on the table, written neatly, almost gently. Her name was Martha Hill. 54 years old. A woman known for kindness, patience, and grace. The neighbor who baked for birthdays, the teacher who stayed late for struggling students, the friend who listened without judgment. But sometime before sunrise, something inside her broke, quietly, completely. And by morning, 5 lives had vanished in the space of a single decision. What happened inside that home wasn't random. It wasn't madness without meaning. It was the final chapter of a storm no one saw coming, a story of secrets, silence, and the slow unraveling of love itself. What could drive a woman who had everything to destroy everything? What darkness grows in the corners of a life that looks perfect from the outside? And how much pain can the human heart carry before it finally breaks? If you think you've seen every kind of tragedy love can create, stay. Because this story will show you that the most devastating betrayals don't come from strangers. They come from home. Subscribe, and prepare to hear a story that begins with love, and ends in silence. From the outside, the Hill family looked untouched by chaos. A neat brick house sat behind a white fence, roses blooming perfectly along the front yard. Every morning, you could find Martha Hill, 54, sweeping her porch with quiet pride, the kind of woman who believed peace wasn't found, it was kept. Her neighbors saw her as a pillar of kindness. A patient teacher, a devoted wife, and a mother who lived for her family. She moved through life gently, the sort of presence that calmed a room simply by being there. Her husband, Darren Hill, 40 years old, was the opposite kind of charm, loud, magnetic, and admired. He owned a small contracting business, talked easily with everyone, and carried himself with a confidence that drew people in. To the outside world, they balanced each other perfectly, Martha's stillness, Darren's spark. Their daughter, Rachel, 28, had just returned home with her newborn twins, small, delicate reminders that life still moved forward. She worked long hospital shifts, and coming home to her parents' house gave her a sense of safety she'd missed for years. To anyone looking in, they were the kind of family people envied. Sunday mornings meant laughter spilling from the kitchen, coffee brewing, and Darren's voice singing off-key. Martha would smile as she looked at her family, her garden, her husband, her daughter, the babies. Everything she'd ever wanted, all under one roof. But sometimes, perfection is only quiet because something beneath it has stopped breathing. And though Martha didn't know it yet, the walls that held her peace were beginning to shift, not with noise, but with silence. A silence that hides more than it reveals. The changes came slowly, so quietly that Martha almost missed them. A word left unfinished. A glance too long. A tone that didn't sound like home. Darren started coming in later, brushing off questions with the same easy laugh that once charmed her. He smelled of unfamiliar perfumes sometimes, and though she noticed, she forced herself to forget. He'd always been friendly, maybe too friendly, but she refused to believe anything darker could live in the man she loved. Rachel, too, began to drift. She moved through the house like a shadow, gentle with her babies, but distant with her mother. There were nights when Martha would find her daughter sitting in the nursery, eyes red, the twins asleep, her face unreadable. When asked if she was okay, Rachel would only smile faintly and say she was just tired. Martha told herself this was normal. New motherhood. Stress. Family adjusting. But deep down, she felt something else, a quiet wrongness that followed her from room to room. Sometimes, while doing laundry, she'd hear whispers behind closed doors, soft, hurried, gone before she could place them. Sometimes she'd walk into a room and feel conversation die mid-sentence. The house that once felt alive now held a tension she could almost taste. At night, the ticking clock in the hallway grew louder. The shadows felt longer. She'd lie awake beside her husband, staring at the ceiling, feeling her pulse rise without reason. She didn't know what was changing, only that it was, and that she was losing control of something she couldn't name. The peace she had spent decades building was slipping through her fingers. And though she told herself everything was fine, the truth was already awake. It was breathing inside that house, waiting for the night when silence would no longer protect her. It was a gray Thursday afternoon, the kind of day that feels harmless, but isn't. Martha had taken the day off work to clean. Not because the house was messy, but because her thoughts were. She dusted shelves that didn't need dusting, rearranged drawers she'd already organized, trying to keep her hands busy while her heart felt uneasy. Rachel's room was quiet. The twins slept peacefully, their breathing soft and rhythmic. Martha smiled as she picked up a fallen baby blanket. Until she noticed a folded envelope tucked beneath the crib. She froze. It wasn't addressed to anyone, but something about it pulled her in. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside were hospital papers, medical test results. Her eyes scanned the words slowly at first, then faster, until the letters blurred. DNA confirmation. She saw the names. And the world stopped. She tried to breathe, but her lungs felt locked. She read the page again. Then again. No mistake. No misprint. Just truth, sharp, merciless, final. The papers slipped from her fingers and scattered across the floor like broken glass. For a long time, she couldn't move. Couldn't cry. Couldn't scream. The only sound in the room was the soft ticking of the wall clock and the twins breathing in their sleep. It wasn't just betrayal. It was erasure, of every belief she had about her life. Every Sunday dinner, every anniversary card, every whispered, "I love you," replayed in her mind, stripped of meaning. She sat on the floor, staring into space as daylight faded into evening. The air smelled of baby lotion and silence. When she finally rose, she felt lighter, but not freer. Just emptied. She folded the papers, placed them in her nightstand, and washed her hands under cold water, as if truth could be rinsed away. That night, she lay beside Darren, eyes open in the dark, listening to the sound of his steady breathing. And in that stillness, she whispered to herself. Everything I built was a lie. 3 days passed. The house looked the same, but the air inside had changed. Martha moved through it like a stranger, her smile rehearsed, her tone calm, her eyes empty. Darren joked. Rachel pretended. The babies laughed. But nothing was real anymore. The silence between them wasn't peace, it was pressure. Waiting to break. That evening, as the sun set and the sky turned amber, Martha called Darren into the kitchen. Her voice was steady. Her hands didn't shake. On the table lay the envelope. She slid it toward him. The sound of paper scraping against wood was the only noise in the room. He looked at it, then at her. Confusion flickered, then fear. Minutes passed before he spoke. He denied it. Denied everything. Said she didn't understand, that she'd gone too far, that she was making things up. His voice rose just enough to hide the truth behind it. But Martha wasn't listening for explanations anymore. She watched his mouth move, his eyes dart, his breath shorten. And she knew. Rachel appeared in the doorway, pale, trembling, her face drained of color. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. Her silence was the answer Martha didn't want. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. The hum of the refrigerator filled the air like static. Martha's voice finally broke the stillness. Soft. Low. Unrecognizable. Why? Neither of them answered. Because there was nothing left to say. She turned away first. Walked to her room. Closed the door. Outside, the night settled over the house like a shroud. She sat on the edge of her bed until her reflection disappeared from the darkened mirror. No tears. No anger. Only quiet acceptance, the kind that doesn't heal, only hardens. And in that still, airless room, one thought came to her like a whisper that wasn't her own. If peace cannot live here, nothing should. Days passed and the house stayed immaculate, counters wiped to a sheen, floors without a trace of dust, roses pruned to perfect symmetry. The order didn't soothe her. It only made the emptiness louder. Routine compressed into muscle memory. Breakfast plated. Laundry folded. Bottles warmed. Faces smiled. None of it reached her. She trimmed repetition from her life the way she clipped dead petals from the roses. Neighbors waved, her hand lifted, then fell. At church, her lips moved with the hymns while her mind stayed still. The faint smell of bleach began to linger in the hall, too clean, too quiet, a private ritual of erasure. The house's sounds rearranged themselves. The ticking hallway clock advanced like a metronome. A plastic mobile above the crib chimed 3 slow notes whenever the air moved, as if the room itself were breathing. In the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed steady and indifferent. One afternoon she stepped into a pawn shop. Dust motes turned in a slant of window light. Glass cases reflected dull metal and old stories. The clerk set a small revolver on the felt. The cylinder clicked with a dry mechanical certainty. The cash drawer slid open with a single clean note, then shut. She left with a paper bag that didn't crinkle. That evening she cooked their favorite meal. Roasting bird, browned skin. Cornbread split clean with the knife. A bottle eased from its cork with a soft exhale. She set the table with deliberate symmetry, plates aligned to the edge, cutlery parallel, candles centered. The arrangement felt like language, order imposed upon noise. In the nursery, the twins slept. In the living room, laughter sounded practiced. She stood at the window as daylight thinned and her reflection dissolved into the glass. This was not revenge. It was an end to performance. A closing of curtains after too long on stage. Calm settled over her like cool water. She did not feel rage. She felt finished. The air held stillness, as if the house had taken one long breath and refused to let it go. Dinner unfolded without surprise. Compliments, fragments of small talk, a passing of the bread. Candlelight pared every face down to planes and shadows, almost beautiful in its simplicity. She poured the last wine. A bead slid down the glass and pooled on the table. Her hand paused on the cloth's stitched edge, fingers reading the seam as if it were a line she had reached at last. Then she stood and walked the quiet hallway. The drawer opened. The revolver waited. Metal against skin. Weight that answered back. She returned to the table. The clock posed its next second. The house listened. What followed did not take long. Sound cracked the room apart and then closed over it again. Once. Twice. Silence surged forward to fill what had fallen away. Upstairs, the nursery answered with thin, breaking cries. She climbed the steps, steady, breath measured, a figure moving through the last dimension of a life. In the doorway she hesitated, a full heartbeat, the world holding to that pause. And then the night accepted the remainder. Fire came after. It started soft, a candle leaning into a curtain, a lick of orange-tasting fabric, a sigh of heat rising across paint. Oxygen rushed to meet it. Flames took what they were offered, color first, memory next. Smoke alarms wailed briefly, then muffled under their own haze. When firefighters forced the door, heat exhaled into the street. They moved through rooms already translated into ash and steam. In the nursery they found a still tableau, the revolver at rest, her body set beside the crib, the final embrace frozen in the last geometry of the night. Headlines would try to compress it. They could not. What had happened here could not live in a line of text. The silence she wanted came, and it took everything with it. Dawn rose gray over the street, washing color out of everything it touched. The house sat still, its windows blurred with smoke from the night before. A neighbor stepped outside to fetch the paper and caught the faint scent of something wrong, varnish, ash, and grief. Another called it in. Sirens split the silence. Fire crews arrived first, their lights flickering red against the pale sky. They broke down the front door, and heat breathed out to meet them. Water filled the air in bursts, hissing as it met what the fire had left behind. Inside, every room told a version of the same story. The kitchen table remained set, plates aligned, forks parallel, as if dinner still waited for laughter that would never come. A photo frame leaned against the hallway wall, its glass fractured but holding the same smiling faces beneath. Upstairs, the nursery waited in a quiet no human voice could cross. A firefighter paused at the doorway, gloved hand resting on the frame, eyes fixed on what shouldn't exist. He stood still longer than procedure allowed, then turned away. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The air said everything. When the smoke cleared, investigators began their work. A charred envelope lay beside a nightstand, its edges blackened, but the words inside still intact. It was collected, sealed, logged, the last surviving truth of a life that had already ended. Outside, the street filled with onlookers, whispers, trembling prayers, phones held low. By evening, reporters were there, rehearsing lines under the drone of generators. Neighbors lit candles along the curb. Some wept. Some just stared. By nightfall, only yellow tape remained. The doors were boarded. The house was silent again, except now, the silence felt permanent. The street exhaled, learning how to breathe around an absence. Violence within a family rarely begins with violence. It begins with silence, the kind that grows between people who love each other too much to speak what they fear. Betrayal is not just the breaking of trust, it's the shattering of identity. When the person you depend on becomes the source of pain, the mind splits. It begins rewriting memories to survive, searching for meaning inside chaos. The human mind learns to call danger love when it comes from someone it once trusted. It learns to stay quiet, to adapt, to pretend. And when truth finally breaks through, it doesn't always bring peace, sometimes it brings collapse. For Martha Hill, silence became its own logic. The betrayal she uncovered didn't just destroy her family, it destroyed her sense of self. To her, the only way to end the noise was to erase the stage where the noise began. Psychologists call it familial annihilation. The belief that ending everyone's pain ends one's own. But the truth is simpler, and far sadder, the line between love and despair is paper thin, and once crossed, it's almost impossible to return. Communities see the aftermath, the tape, the candles, the photos. But they rarely see the microfractures, the way someone stops meeting your eyes, how laughter comes a beat late, how the house feels too clean, too quiet, too perfect. Real prevention doesn't start with judgment, it starts with presence. With asking twice when someone says they're fine. With noticing when everything's okay sounds like a plea. This house is gone, but its warning remains. Secrets rot in silence. And love, when it's real, survives being questioned. So ask again. Look closer. And when the world feels too quiet, listen. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left to save, not a name, not a heartbeat, not a future. 5 lives erased in one night. No survivors. No second chances. Just the outline of a house that once promised love, now remembered only for the silence it left behind. This wasn't only the end of a family. It was the end of every chance someone had to ask what was wrong. For weeks, neighbors slowed their cars when they passed the empty lot, searching for meaning in the ashes, listening for answers the walls could no longer give. But houses don't speak. They remember. Between the laughter that once filled their rooms and the silence that swallowed them lies a truth too many ignore. Pain that hides in silence does not fade. It multiplies. The tragedy of the Hill family is more than crime, it is warning. It tells us what happens when love becomes denial, when kindness turns quiet, and when no one looks closely enough to see that peace has become performance. If you're hearing this tonight, let it remind you of something simple. Ask again. Listen twice. Reach out even when it feels uncomfortable. Because sometimes, saving a life doesn't come from knowing what to say. It comes from refusing to look away. Even in the darkest stories, awareness can be light. And light, when shared, saves. This is not just a crime story. It's a mirror. And what it shows depends on whether we choose to see. Subscribe for more true stories that reveal how fragile love can be, and how silence, left unchallenged, can destroy what words could have saved.